am Erika Sugarmon, a Shelby County Schools educator and a grassroots activist. I want to welcome everyone to Lifting the Veil of Secrecy on Shelby County Elections. Suzanne Pashan, Executive Director of Florida Fair Elections Coalition, will be the co-moderator for the night. And Ann Gaines will be interpreting for the hard of hearing and deaf community. Welcome, Ms. Gaines. We are honored to have such a distinguished panel of who represents a who's who of national, state, and local experts on the topic of open government and secure elections. But first, I want to thank the sponsors of this forum, Dr. Miriam DaCosta Willis, a former professor, civil rights activist, and an author of 15 books, State Representative Dwyane Thompson and Jim Coley, and Katrina Thompson, President of the Memphis chapter of the National Coalition of 100 Black Women, Incorporated, and board member of Willow, Women in Leadership Leaning on Wisdom, Incorporated. The National Coalition of Black Women, the Memphis chapter, have submitted 2 resolutions, one for Mayor Lee Harris and the other one for Governor Lee. Dwyane Thompson, State Representative, are you here? Would you do the honor, thank you. Would you do the honor of reading the first resolution?
I will. Okay, whereas the National Coalition of 100 Black Women Incorporated, Memphis chapter, recognized that the citizens of Shelby County, state of Tennessee, the state at large, and the nation rely on the electoral process to ensure citizens have their voices heard by participating in elections and having access to ballots that encompass the demographics of the county without punitive measures. Whereas we support the Shelby County Commission in its efforts to encourage the Shelby County Election Commission to purchase a new voting system, Shelby County voter representatives overwhelmingly voiced their opinion on April 1, 2020 and April 23, 2020 during the Shelby County Election Commission meetings that citizens want a hand-marked paper ballot voting HMPB system. Whereas in case studies presented throughout the country, electronic voting software and hardware can be compromised and does not ensure trust, accuracy, and accountability, thus allowing for the greatest potential of voter corruption. Therefore, be it resolved that the National Coalition of 100 Black Women Incorporated, Memphis chapter, shall support the Shelby County delegation, Tennessee Black Caucus, and citizens of Tennessee to advocate on behalf of the citizens of Shelby County to ensure voter representation in fair, consistent, and statewide.
Thank you, State Representative Dwyane Thompson. Okay. Thank you. And next, Tennessee Representative Jim Coley was not able to be in attendance. So Tennessee Representative G.A. Hardaway will be reading the next resolution. Representative Hardaway, are you with us? No, he's not. So the second resolution, in short, I'll summarize it, was for the governor to request that we have mail-in ballots during this COVID-19 pandemic. Okay, so thank you, the women of the 100 Black Women Coalition. Okay, Pashan, do you want to take it away?
Yes, thank you, Erika. My name is Susan Pinchon. I'm an advisor to Audit Elections USA and executive director of the Florida Fair Elections Coalition. The purpose of this forum today is to lift the veil of secrecy that is surrounding Shelby County's purchase of a multi-million-dollar voting system. Behind the scenes is an administrator of elections who has her own agenda and what appears to be severe conflicts of interest. There are other players as well. The nation's largest voting machine vendor, Election Systems and Software, commonly referred to as ES&S, who has paid lobbyists in Tennessee who just happen to share an office with the attorneys who advise the Shelby County Elections Commission. There are meetings behind closed doors. There are voters who are trying to make their voices heard. So this forum, which includes local and national officials and experts, is an attempt to give information to Shelby County voters that has been kept from them and to give them a voice. Thank you all very much for being in attendance today. We're very happy with the panels of speakers that we have. And with that, I would like to introduce Deborah Fisher, the Executive Director of the Tennessee Coalition for Open Government, who will be talking to us about transparency versus secrecy in Shelby County government. Thank you, Deborah, so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. So I'll get started, and I know that there are a lot of speakers, but just to tell you who I am the Executive Director of Tennessee Coalition for Open Government, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan group in Tennessee that has been around since 2003. And we do education on the state's public records and open meetings laws. We also do advocacy on that issue. And since 2003, we've been involved in a lot of policy issues related to both the Public Records and the Open Meetings Act. We track legislation, we track court cases and court opinions, and have developed some infrastructure to understand what's going on in the state. So I first learned of this issue from Steve Mulroy, who I think is on this phone call, several weeks ago when he when he emailed me to tell me that they were having difficulty getting access to the proposals that the Election Commission would consider for its new election system. And he described to me a public records exemption that was being cited to deny access to those proposals. And so we went back and forth and looked at it, and I think there were some other people in the conversation as well. And essentially, that exemption was one that was passed in 2016. And it says that the responses to a request for proposal can be confidential until an intent to award is announced. It's modeled after a state exemption, but this applies to local, actually government services contracts. And even if this were construed to apply to this purchase of the election system, which there may be some disagreement about that, it's still, the idea behind that exemption has always been that, and it has always been that, say a purchasing department or whatever would score a proposal, and then everything is confidential until after they're finished with their scoring. And then when it goes before a local governing body, the actual proposal is open as well as all the other competing proposals. So this is not what has happened with the Shelby County Election Commission. And my view of it is they are trying very hard to make this exemption, to keep this information confidential, because there is no practical reason why they couldn't follow the process, announce the intent to award, everything would be public before the governing body considers which one they want to actually award the contract to. So that is one of the issues, and I can answer more questions about that later. But essentially, there's no practical reason, despite what the attorneys say, for them not to take some action where those proposals can be open. Now, I will say that the exemption is poorly worded, as some of our exemptions in the public records law is, and I have to get that in since we have a state rep on the line. And I want him to know about that for public records exemptions that go before the legislature. But it does say that anybody, it doesn't make any distinction about who can announce that intent to award. So for example, the administrator of the Shelby County Election Commission could score the proposals and make the recommendation and make an announcement on intent to award, and then it would all be open before the Shelby County Election Commission. So there's that in terms of what I've heard for the reason for keeping that confidential. But the other thing that concerns me actually has to do with the Open Meetings Act. And in Tennessee, we have a very strong open meetings law. It starts by saying that the General Assembly declares it to be the policy of the state that the formation of public policy decisions is public business and shall not be conducted in secret. And my understanding is that there has been some effort or plan to have executive sessions, rather closed sessions or closed meetings of the Election Commission so that they can really talk about the proposals in secret and deliberate about those in secret, and then maybe come out in public and perhaps speak in code and vote on which one they'll go with. But that absolutely flies in the face of the open meetings law in Tennessee, where really there are very few exceptions to not meet in public. And really the only one that would be available to the Election Commission would be an attorney-client privilege. And even that privilege, even that exception is narrow.
Do you hear me?
As construed by the Supreme Court. Yes. And the Supreme Court has said even that in that instance, there has to be pending litigation or potential litigation to have that attorney-client privilege. So that's clearly not what's happening in this situation. So I am concerned when I've heard that the Election Commission is going into a so-called executive session, meaning they're meeting, but they're not meeting in public. In general, though, why the proposed contract should be open. This is the same reason why any proposed contract should be open before the governing body votes. And that is because the public has a right to know whether they're voting on something as important as, and then that touches so many citizens as a voting election system, or whether they're voting to give economic incentives of millions of dollars to a particular company, or they're voting to rezone, a piece of property. There are so many things that you can look at in terms of proposals that should be open. This, of course, is a contract proposal, so in this instance, knowing who the companies are that are being considered, knowing how much the contracts are worth, knowing some of the details about the different service would allow the public to have some kind of input to their representatives on the commission about information that they have that could be important in making a decision. And so that's part of the democratic process. That's part of what should be happening in this situation. So in the end, the more I've heard about this issue, and I don't have a dog in the hunt on what election system is selected. That's not my area of expertise, nor is it anything that we advocate on with TCOG in terms of elections. But I do believe that denying the public access to some of this information sort of flies in the face of the Public Records Act and the Open Meetings Act. In fact, the Public Records Act says that if access to information is denied, as it is in this case, and you go to Chancery Court and challenge that denial, that the judge has to broadly construe the Public Records Act so as to give the fullest possible access to public records. So what we have here is not a broad construction of the Public Records Act to make that information available. We have a construction of the Public Records Act in the most narrow terms to try to keep that information from the public.
Thank you,
from
Deborah.
the standpoint of transparency in Tennessee, this is not in keeping with either the Public Records or the Open Meetings Act. So I can certainly answer other questions, but I want to,
All right, Deborah, thank you. Thank you so much, Deborah. We're going to leave the questions till the end of the forum. Thank you so much. And our next speaker is Jennifer Cohn, Jenny Cohn, who is an attorney, writer, and election integrity advocate. She has practiced law for 23 years in the San Francisco Bay Area, and she has several different items she's supposed to talk to us about, and that'll be a great follow-up to Deborah's wonderful talk about secrecy in government. Thank you again, Deborah. And Jenny, take it away.
Hi, thanks for having me here. So I'm very interested in what is going to happen in Shelby County, Tennessee with its decision-making on new election equipment. I'm a national election integrity advocate, and most election integrity advocates and almost all election security experts recommend that the jurisdictions use hand-marked paper ballots, which is paper and pen, for most voters. Unfortunately, there has been a trend in the past several years in the United States toward a new touchscreen system called a universal use ballot marking device. And these are touchscreens that look a lot like what Shelby County currently uses, but their only function is to serve as a hackable electronic ballpoint pen. And then typically you would use a separate scanner to count the paper output from these machines. And there are a number of reasons why I and other election integrity advocates are very concerned about these systems that I'll get into in a minute, but I want to say that this debate is not arising in a vacuum in Shelby County. Shelby County has long been the subject of concerns about the integrity of its elections. And I'm going to pull up a document that I created here. Let's see. Here we go. So Shelby County's, can you see this? I'll assume you can. Shelby County's current touchscreen voting machines were supplied by a vendor named Diebold Election Systems. And Diebold was acquired by another vendor called ES&S around 2009, which took over the Diebold contracts in a number of jurisdictions, including Shelby County. ES&S is also the supplier of Shelby County's electronic poll books, which are check-in computers used to confirm voter registrations at the polls and to confirm that voters haven't voted more than once. As I understand it, ES&S is likely a top contender to sell Shelby County its new voting equipment. Although the concerns with the integrity of Shelby County's elections have been long-standing, things really came to a head around 2010, which was soon after this individual, Richard Holden, became the election administrator in the county. And in 2010, for the first time, the Republicans really swept all of the county races in Shelby County. And this is very surprising because Shelby County is a majority African-American county. During that election, there were problems with ES&S electronic poll books, and there were also problems with more votes than voters. And again, this was using, at this point, it's ES&S has the contract for the Diebold voting machines in the county. This was discovered, I believe, by Beverly Harris, who will be speaking later. In 2012, problems persisted where 3,000 voters were given the wrong ballots. There was an internal investigation by the Tennessee State Comptroller, and in 2013, even an FBI investigation of the Shelby County Election Commission. In 2014, Republicans again managed to win almost all of the countywide elections in Shelby County. The following month, the 9 losing Democratic candidates in the county filed a lawsuit alleging that the voting machines were vulnerable to hacking and had been hacked or manipulated in that election. Although the suit was tossed out because the plaintiffs couldn't prove that hacking had occurred, the following year in 2015, Benny Smith, who currently sits on the Shelby County Election Commission, was able to discover that votes from predominantly Black precincts in the county had disappeared. And he was able to make this discovery by comparing the precinct totals, which are printed after every election, comparing those with the official reported totals. This was also reported in Bloomberg. So soon after this discovery, which was really a bombshell, it confirmed a lot of the fears that African-American voters in particular had been expressing in the county. Soon after that, in December 2015, State Representative Hardaway called for the firing of an investigation into Richard Holden, who was again the Shelby County Administrator. A few days later, Holden announced his decision to retire at the end of the year, and so now we have Linda Phillips. In July of 2018, ES&S admitted in response to an inquiry by US Senator Ron Wyden that despite its prior denials, ES&S had installed remote access software in the central tabulators for a number of its customers. And this is very problematic because a central tabulator is the county system that aggregates all of the precinct totals. So if you wanted to manipulate an election, the central tabulator is really the treasure chest. And it seems that ES&S installed remote access software for some of its customers. As it turns out, one of those customers was Shelby County. ES&S probably made this admission about its remote access software because this was the first time it had been asked by a member of Congress about its remote access software. Although it advised that the software had been removed, it would not say if this occurred before or after the 2016 election, which suggests that it was after. The next countywide election in Shelby County, Tennessee was the first in a long time without Richard Holden, and it was also the first election after ES&S had been exposed for its remote access software, which it says has been removed. This time it was the Democrats that swept the floor with the Republicans, and the Democrats that won every single county race. Most are winning at least almost every single county race, and most of these Democrats were women, and here's a picture of some of the women who won that election. As I understand it, though, the Republicans on the Shelby County Election Commission want to replace the current system with a new system also from ES&S, the same vendor whose systems have proven so problematic in prior elections. And this is problematic for a number of concerns. In addition to ES&S having misled about remote access software, it has misled about internet connectivity of its systems. It turns out it installed wireless modems in ballot scanners in swing states in 2015, and those connect the systems to the internet. It's also been responsible for a number of leaks in recent years, including the voter information for 1.8 million Chicago voters, employee passwords. The password for its electronic poll books was recently discovered to be 1234. It also knocked 118,000 voters off the voter rolls in LA County, and it mistakenly purged over 1,000 voters recently in Ohio. And its voting machines have also been responsible for missing Black votes, not only in Shelby County, but also in the state of Georgia. About these systems that ES&S prefers or has really been promoting its universal use ballot marking device touchscreens over hand-marked paper ballots and scanners. They cost a lot more money than hand-marked paper ballots and scanners, so there is a profit incentive there. But the problem is these touchscreens take voters 3 times as long to use. It's long been known that all touchscreens tend to create longer lines than hand-marked paper ballots and scanners because they limit the number of voters who can vote concurrently to the number of touchscreens at the polling place, so it creates this bottleneck. Anytime you put a machine or touch screen between voters and their ballots, there are going to be problems with breaking down. These universal use ballot marking devices are a relatively new phenomenon, and they have been breaking down. So in South Carolina very recently, 20% of them broke down in at least one county. They're also vulnerable to miscalibration errors, which was observed in Northampton County. And there are concerns that a recent study showed that 93% of errors on these touchscreen systems go unnoticed by voters. And finally, most of these systems, and really all of the ones that ES&S is promoting, these touchscreens, put your votes into barcodes. And of course, And the barcode is what appears on the printout with human readable text beneath it, but the barcode is the only part that's actually counted as your vote. And of course, this is a problem because humans can't read barcodes. So experts almost universally are recommending hand-marked paper ballots and scanners, not these new touchscreen systems. And the only question is whether the Shelby County Election Commission will listen to them. Thank you very much.
Jenny, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. We have several more speakers, and our next speaker is Chris Sauter. Chris is an American University professor specializing in election law. He is a nationally prominent election recount attorney, author, filmmaker, and special counsel to Audit Elections USA. Welcome, Chris. Thank you for being here. Thank you again, Jenny.
Thank you very much. So far, some really good discussion and presentations. I want to begin sort of dovetailing with what Deborah talked about with the question of secrecy. And secrecy is inherently undemocratic. And it's actually a fairly new concept in American government. It didn't really arrive until World War II and the years after. Before that, no government activity, no matter what it was, could be invoked for secrecy reasons. So more often than not, in my experience, secrecy is invoked in order to conceal either embarrassing behavior or illegal acts or corruption. And I think the place to, in Shelby County, we sort of have a classic debate over what ought to be open and what ought to be kept confidential. And I think the starting point for that is the fundamental decision, which is what type of voting equipment is in the best interest of the voters in Shelby County. And there are actually two options. And Jennifer talked about those. Hand-marked paper ballots is one option, and the other is ballot marking devices. And that's really a policy question that has to be resolved before the contract is, the contract proposals, the bids are even entertained. And there also another starting point are certain false assumptions, which are that this debate, the debate over what kind of voting equipment should be purchased, has to be done in executive session, in other words, in secret, and that no discussions about what is considered in executive session may be debated in public. And those are clearly false assumptions. Now, Deborah talked about the Tennessee Open Meetings Act, and the part I want to talk about is really at the beginning, where the act says that all matters of policy must be heard and decided in public. They cannot be conducted in secret. As I said, the first decision that has to be made is whether or not to go with the hand-marked paper ballots or whether or not to go with the ballot marking devices. And this is a policy decision. In other words, this is a matter that must be considered in public before the contracts are even discussed. And how do I know that this is a policy decision? Because the Elections Commission director, Linda Phillips, has been discussing the merits of hand-marked paper ballots in public. She has been arguing, she's been making policy arguments against hand-marked paper ballots. And so that is a discussion that should be happening within the commission in public with public input and public debate. That is not a question that should be, as a matter of law, that should be discussed in private. Now, what has happened is that Linda Phillips has basically usurped the authority of the commission and essentially made the decision on her own that that decision as to the type of voting should be hand-marked paper ballots. And and apparently what happened in an April 1st meeting, which John Brakey, who will be on later, taped, was that Linda Phillips asked for a motion to allow her to make the decision as to which vendor should be hired without disclosing who the vendor would be and the amount of the contract. And after Commissioner Benny Smith raised serious objections, the matter never did come to a vote. Now, so the bottom line on this is that this policy question should be discussed in public. Now, there's been a number of questions that are been asked about executive session, and I know I'm kind of running a little bit over my time, but I want to say a couple of things real quick about executive session, because the argument has been made by Ms. Phillips and counsel that nothing discussed in executive session may be raised in the public meeting. And I believe that is a very narrow, if not unlawful, interpretation of the open meetings law. A member of the commission can do a number of things, even assuming that the question of sealed bids, even if you assume that is a legitimate private discussion, a commissioner can still, a member of the commission may still explain in public his or her reason for opposing the recommendation of the board. The member may characterize or criticize an action of the director or the commission. A member may discuss matters that have already been discussed publicly, such as Linda Phillips's criticism of hand-marked paper ballots, and a member may also discuss anything else that has been in the public domain. Those are things that the council and Ms. Phillips are trying to prevent from public discussion, even if you're assuming, which I don't think we have to, that the contractual matters are exclusively a matter for executive session. So in short, I would encourage Commissioner Smith and anybody else who has concerns about this process to insist that that the matter of the decision as to which kind of voting equipment is in the best interests of the voters of the county be discussed and decided in public, and also that secondly, that the recommendation of the director, and assuming the commission votes 3-2 along party lines, to go along with the director's recommendation, that contract be reviewed by an expert to make sure that the numbers add up. So that is my reading of the situation in the Open Records Act.
Chris, thank you very much. That was very interesting. And just for those who are tuned in, I'd like to let you know that we're mixing, sort of going back and forth here. I'll introduce our next speaker in just a moment. But because there's this huge decision that Shelby County is in the middle of, we're having speakers talk about hand-marked paper ballots and ballot marking devices. And we'll also have more speakers coming up to talk about the conflicts of interest and the secrecy that's happening in Shelby County. So there's a mix of that coming up. And our next speaker, Kevin Skoglund, is a highly respected programmer, teacher, digital security consultant, and voting advocate. Many people around the country turn to Kevin for advice on voting issues. Welcome, Kevin. And Kevin will be talking to us about hand-marked paper ballots.
Hello. So I'm Kevin Skoglund. I'm the President and Chief Technologist for Citizens for Better Elections, and I'm also a cybersecurity consultant and an expert on voting systems. Tonight, I want to talk to you about trust and evidence, and also the difference between hand-marked paper ballots and ballot marking devices. Elections are a tool for democracy, but it's trust in elections that actually makes democracy work. Trust can be earned by having evidence-based elections. Other elections can count votes correctly, it can return results, but elections that produce evidence provide proof that those outcomes are correct. And this proof is what allows the public to trust that elections are fair and gives legitimacy to the office holders. And for any candidate who loses, it reassures them that the election was decided correctly. Evidence of every vote is the reason that we're getting rid of all these paperless voting machines that are still used in parts of the country. Those paperless machines may be counting the votes correctly, but they don't produce evidence. We can't recount them. We can't prove that the total is correct. Instead, we just have to take it on faith that they're right. And we know from experience that they aren't always right. And that's no way for us to build trust. And remember, democracy depends on that trust. So elections are more trustworthy when we have durable evidence that we can look to. And the gold standard for evidence-based elections, as many have said, is hand-marked paper ballot systems. So that means most voters will mark a ballot with a pen to be counted by an optical scanner. And there will also be a working ballot marking device in every polling place for any voter who wants assistance marking their ballot. And then there should be routine post-election audits of the results to provide assurance that the winners are correct, because we still don't trust that the scanner did its job right either. We're going to want evidence that it did. So hand-marked paper ballot systems are the best for many reasons, but one of the biggest is the quality of the evidence that they produce. As judges and attorneys and people in the court system know, all evidence is not of equal quality. DNA evidence is stronger than other types of forensic evidence. Video evidence is stronger than eyewitness evidence. And hand-marked paper ballots produce strong evidence. A voter marks their selections directly. The distance between the voter and that evidence is really small. So it's an effective way to record the voter's intent. All machine-marked ballots produce weak evidence. And the reason is simple. There's now a machine that sits between the voter and that evidence. And that machine can fail, it can malfunction, or it can be manipulated. A common complaint for touchscreens is that there are calibration problems that cause vote flipping from one candidate to another. So you try to vote for your preferred candidate and the vote shows up for someone else. In addition, the voter also has to perform an extra step when they use a machine-marked ballot, because they have to carefully review the ballot that the machine produces to make sure that it did its job correctly. The voter has to verify the quality of the evidence. And the problem is that most don't. In 2018, a study found that only 53% of voters bothered to review their ballot at all. Other studies added intentional errors to ballots and found that even the voters who check them rarely detect those errors. So if voters aren't verifying that the ballots are correct, then it's weak evidence of their intent. It's not much better than the current machines where we blindly trust that each vote is being recorded correctly. Now, after the election, we can have post-election audits with these ballot marked devices, and we can use the evidence to confirm that the election outcome is correct. But post-election audits can only detect tabulation errors. They depend on having high-quality evidence that's already stored in the ballot box. They can't detect errors that the voting machine made when it was marking the ballot. So once the voter casts it, it becomes gospel at that point, even if it's flawed. The creator of risk limiting audits wrote a paper which explains that the evidence produced by machines is so weak that risk limiting audits of those ballots are meaningless. And most of the voting systems, as Jenny said, don't count the human readable text from the ballot marking devices anyway. They count these machine readable barcodes that are printed on the ballot, which gets us back to a system where voters have to trust that their votes are being recorded correctly without any evidence that that's the case. Now, there are many other reasons to like these hand-marked paper ballot systems. They cost way less. My organization, Citizens for Better Elections, partnered with Pitt Cyber at the University of Pittsburgh, and we analyzed the cost of voting machine purchases in Pennsylvania's counties during last year, 2019. 2/3 of the counties picked hand-marked ballots, and 1/3 purchased ballot marking devices for all voters. The average cost per voter for the BMDs was a little over $23 per voter. That's twice as expensive as hand-marked paper ballots, where it was $11 per voter. The costs are almost exactly double. Philadelphia has 1 million voters, and they paid $20 million for their voting system with BMDs. Pittsburgh also has $1 million, and they paid also has 1 million voters, and they paid $11 million for their hand-marked paper ballot system. A huge difference, $18 million difference between those two cities. And over its lifetime, those hand-marked paper ballot systems also have lower costs for maintenance, repair, storage, everything you can imagine. So touchscreens are really just a $5,000 pen when a 50-cent one would do. As Jenny mentioned, they also have shorter lines. That surprises some people, but it's because you can have a fast voter next to a slow voter, next to a fast voter, and you can have multiple voters all voting at the same time. You don't have that bottleneck with the BMDs where you're limited by the number of machines. And then it's also easy and inexpensive to set up additional privacy booths if you need. So it makes the lines much shorter. The paper ballots are also very intuitive. Everyone knows how to mark a paper ballot, and it's better for voters who have challenges with literacy, language, and memory. Those voters can take their time and not feel like they're holding up the line with everyone frustrated behind them. And then for universal accessibility, some people argue that you should use BMDs because they're better for people who have disabilities. We definitely want to have a ballot marking device in every polling place, but we want universal accessibility, which means allowing voters to choose the system that works best for them. A ballot marking device is going to be better for people who have vision and mobility impairments, but a hand marking a ballot is going to be more accessible for voters who are less comfortable with technology or who have screen sensitivities. And it's sometimes better for voters in wheelchairs for their privacy and accessibility as well. We also find that having those shorter lines is better for voters with disabilities who have physical limitations and may not be able to stand in line for a long time. We see that a lot with voters who are older. And then last of all, of course, I'm a cybersecurity expert. The systems that are hand-marked paper ballot systems are more secure and more resilient to problems. The voting system is just simply less dependent on computers that may malfunction or be manipulated. So for that reason, they're more secure. And if there's a loss of power or hardware malfunctions, voting can continue. But if you put a computer between a voter and the ballot, you have to ask what happens if it doesn't work. And the last thing I want to say is that, I watched Pennsylvania make these purchases. Everyone in Pennsylvania, every county upgraded during 2019. And there were some counties who had a very public and deliberative process, and they invited their citizens in, and they engaged them, and they listened to them. And there were others who didn't. There were others where it was a top-down decision. And it sounds very similar to what's happening in Shelby County, where the election administrator wanted one thing and the election commission wanted something different, or the citizens asked for something different and they were ignored. A good example of that is Northampton County, Pennsylvania. The election administrator decided what he wanted and pushed the decision through, while the citizens and the election commission actually did not want it. They ended up paying more, and they ended up with a worse outcome. If you want to take the time, search on the New York Times for Northampton County, Pennsylvania, because in 2019, as Jenny mentioned, they had a big snafu where basically they got to the end of the night and they went to look at those vote totals from the machines, and they all said 0, every single one of them. And they basically spent all night bringing in other machines so that they could recount the votes and have some kind of result the following day. But it just shows that you need to have a resilient election system. So it just makes sense for a ton of reasons. The fact that it's cheaper, the fact that it's you know, better for so many voters, shorter lines, but also because it produces the best evidence of what the voters actually intended to vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. That was wonderful. Thank you so much. All right, that was a great description of hand-marked paper ballots versus ballot marking devices. Our next speaker is John Brakey. John is the co-founder of AUDIT USA, which we commonly refer to as AUDIT Elections USA, which is a nonpartisan organization fighting to make elections transparent and verifiable. John has been traveling all over the country. I think this is his 18th state, to bring public forums such as this to the people and to help voters make good decisions about policy and about voting systems. So welcome, John. Are you there?
I am. I'm sorry that I cannot join you by video because I had a presentation, but I'm going to try to go pretty quick on this because I know that we're running out of time. So anyway, I'm setting my time up here. Start. Okay. Reset. Go. Okay. So anyway, I'm going to talk about Shelby County's election administrator, Linda Phillips, who has misrepresented, distorted, and even fabricated facts about hand-marked paper ballots in order to promote a system that is far less secure and far more expensive. You know, we ran the numbers. I'm an estimator, and to me, if they're going to spend $10 million, at least $6.5 million is for ballot marking devices if they buy enough of them. Okay, and as Kevin said, and everybody else, is that they're replacing an ink pen with a $5,000 or $4,000 machine. Ms. Phillip has been framing the decision about the purchase of voting equipment as one in which the county election board will contract with a vendor, which we know happens to be ES&S, and we know that as a fact because of the documentation that we pulled together. To sell the BMDs rather than the choice of hand-marked paper ballots. Ms. Phillip has done this in a variety of public statements, as well as we assume in statements during the executive session. Her misrepresentations, dismissal of the comments about hand-marked paper ballots fails in 3 categories. Hand-marked paper ballots is voting error. I hope some of you have had the opportunity to watch the presentation she gave on April 29th that she called it voter error, and how she misrepresented the facts. And if I had my presentation going here, I'd be showing you a document that was written several years ago that had the impact of ballot types on voter errors. And she put down a 4.4% error rate and claimed all sorts of things, and then blamed people of color for making the mistakes. And didn't really come out and say that if it was a digital scanner or an optical, when they put the ballot in the machine, it would have caught that. And she left no way of fixing that problem, okay? And so I will take those links of some short videos and I'll post them on the feed here after I get done to be able to go into it. Hand-marked paper ballot voting is more expensive than BMDs. I don't think I need to say much on that, but I can tell you this right now. She's running around and telling people that if she goes with hand-marked paper ballots, okay, that they will waste $15 million. And that is not true at all, okay? I want you to know that when you buy into the ES&S system, you know, you think that they're gonna give you the paper for free. Ballots cost 24 cents each. She wants to provide and get paper off them. It costs from 9 to 16 cents for the thermal paper, okay? The licensing and fees over the 14-year period will approach $2 million, okay? It's just a bunch of fabrication. As an election investigator for the last 16 years, one of the things I always look for, and sometimes that I've learned, and I've learned since 2006, when an investigation with Jim March was involved in Shelby County. Bev Harris sent him in there to look at an election for 4 candidates, and that was in 2006. That was my first investigation outside of Arizona that I ever consulted on with Jim March. And I worked closely together with Jim from 2006 to 2013 and kind of followed all the events. In that investigation, Jim March found a critical security breach occurred during the Shelby County election when the Diebold Central Tabular was plugged into the Central County network and unauthorized software was installed. The breach allowed unfettered remote access of the tabular to anyone connected to the county government network internet. Jim also discovered that the Diebold Central Tabulator in Shelby County had PC Anywhere. That's something that Jennifer talked about a little earlier, and which is a deadly device. But what really surprises me and what was wrong in 2006 has been institutionalized and accepted as a routine procedure in 2012. On page 13 of their RFP, it states this: the tabulator is connected on 3 Dell servers that mirror each other. One is located in a remote location connected with a secure private network. What? Again, one is located in a remote location with a secure private network. Hey, I want you to know, in the video that I wanted to show you that was 41 seconds long, that she says that on election night, all the Board of Election people are down there watching that computer. But I don't know if they know that there's a computer somewhere else that's mirrored with the exact thing. That is wrong. You know, in closing, I consider myself to be an election scrutineer type activist who works and believes and teaches what I call the 7 C's: character, capacity, credibility, civility, citizenship, country. And the most important of my 7 C's is courage. It takes courage to stand up sometimes by yourself and after carefully reflecting on the first 6 C's. After all, what kind of a character has the capacity to destroy his credibility by saying or doing something stupid without thinking it out first and consulting with his lawyer like Chris Sauter or Susan Pinshaw or Bev Harris or Arlene Leaf? You know, we have to be very careful. But Miss Phillips has destroyed her credibility with me after seeing what was going on and much more. I don't have the time here to tell you what else we found, but I just want to mention this is almost criminal what she did on the voter registration system, how she worked with the company and never mentioned that that was a company that she worked for before or her relationship with ES&S. Folks, we need to spend more time looking at the conflicts of interest that she has had in her past employer and the voter database that she spent $1 million and the company who set the system up went broke. Her relationship with ES&S apparently goes back to Indiana. We know how Indiana does business. I mean, how business is done with ES&S, how they like to take their election people, fly them off to Vegas, and what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. You know, Benny wrote a letter trying to find out information, and she just came back and kind of covered it up, wrote some pretty things, and kind of walked away from it. After all of this, I just think that we need to get more aggressive and be upfront and let them know that the jig is up and challenge her. But you know, one thing I try to teach people as I run around with a lot of voters, sometimes we have to learn that to unrig a system, we first have to unrig ourselves. And we have to be able to work with people like Kevin and Jennifer and a lot of other people, because sometimes it takes a geek to help everybody else understand how this geek Greek language of elections that we're using in the United States. In closing, I work for elections that are transparent, trackable, and publicly verified. Thank you very much, and I'm sorry I couldn't join you on video.
Thank you, John. I'm sorry you couldn't join us either. You have such a great setup there. We'll have to make sure this doesn't happen in the next forum, but great talk.
We'll figure it out.
Yes, you sure will. Thank you so much. And now I'm very pleased to introduce Bev Harris. Bev is a writer, activist, nationally recognized election expert, founder of the Non-partisan Black Box Voting, and author of Black Box Voting, which you can find online, by the way. She's also a personal friend of mine, and I will just say briefly that in 2010, Bev and I were in Shelby County investigating the 2010 August election, where they put the May database in the August election so that when people showed up at early voting, if they had voted in May, they were told in August that they had already voted. And that was something that was proven, and that's why they called Bev in to investigate, and Bev asked me to help her with that investigation. So with no further ado, I'm very pleased to introduce Bev Harris. Bev, are you there?
Okay, I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes. Hi,
Okay.
Bev.
Hi. Yeah, you know, you may have noticed I've been quiet in recent years. And that's because, and I told Susan, you know, I don't do lobbying, although I think it's crucially important. And I don't do exposés on voting machines, although it's crucially important. And the reason for that is I began to see clearly nearly a decade ago that we were working against a stacked deck. And I got very interested in quantifying the amount of conflict of interest, ethics problems, corruption in the election system as a whole, and getting real documentation on that. And it's kind of on, that's sort of my new area of work, because I think that's the other half that a lot of people have been much too trusting on. I'm a pretty skeptical, but I was very surprised myself. You know, there's about 3,000 counties in the United States. And in any given year, there are at least, and this is a low end, 36,000 indictments of public officials for corruption. It's staggering when you think about it. It's in every state, in every place. And if you add in conflict of interest and ethical violations, which aren't always a felony, it's probably well over 200,000. So with that in mind, I kind of just want to put a perspective on what's happening in Shelby County with this current contract. You've got a multi-million-dollar voting system contract being considered. And I think the areas that I see most obviously are ethics and a tremendous risk of government waste, which in the day of the pandemic, the tax revenues are down hugely. So it puts tremendous risk on the government budget. Two particular individuals kind of popped out, one John Ryder and the other Linda Phillips. Now, John Ryder is an absolutely precise and actually quite an elegant attorney. So I was very surprised to see that he was, while he's acting as the attorney for the Shelby County Elections Commission, where he undoubtedly has access to certain things, that he also has an office and shares an office with the lobbyist for ES&S. Now he says, well, I never talked about it and it's an accident that my name is on the door directly under the lobbyist's name. But the problem is there's an appearance of impropriety, and worse than that, in my research on the mechanisms of how corruption happens, one thing corrupt players want is face-to-face, the ability to get in a room together with no one being able to see. You don't need to talk about anything if you're in a bid rigging situation. And by the way, there have been situations where whole contracts needed to be rebid simply because one of the players from each side was found to be in a room together with no witnesses. All they need to do is scrawl a number on a piece of paper or see a number laying on a table on a piece of paper. It's a very bad look, and I was very surprised. And at the very least, it's not prudent. Certainly, John Ryder should immediately not be in that office anymore. He should extricate himself from that. And there has been precedent for rebidding a whole contract because of that kind of a situation. I'm not saying he's corrupt. I'm saying that he's put himself in a position where corruption tends to take place. It's one of the things they want. And if you have any doubt about that, just look at New Jersey, where they literally had to take all the corrupt politicians away on a school bus at one point when they did a mass thing because they taped a bunch of them. So there's an issue there, and it's certainly a concern. The bigger issue is with Linda Phillips, as many of you have mentioned. I looked into this a little further. And to put this in context, a conflict of interest, there's laws about it, but sometimes they're a little overly restrictive. You have to look at things in terms of, is something notionally legal, but practically unethical? A conflict of interest is simply a set of circumstances that creates a risk that a professional judgment or action regarding a primary interest, which would be Shelby County, will be unduly influenced by a secondary interest. With Linda Phillips, my main concern is her fiduciary judgment. A fiduciary duty is the highest standard of, you have to have the highest standard of care in terms of caring for something financial or a responsibility. You are expected to be extremely loyal to that who you owe the duty, Shelby County. And there cannot be any conflict of duty between the fiduciary and the principal. Linda Phillips, as was mentioned here, the precision on this is in her past job, under her nose, and for several years in a row, more than $300,000 was embezzled from her office. One of her employees was charged with it, but it calls into question her fiduciary competence. How do you run an office that has hundreds of thousands of dollars going out the door unnoticed for year after year? It wasn't her that did it, but her competence is in question. Her next job was tax assessor. She had liens against her for unpaid taxes while she was the tax assessor, and a mortgage default totaling $600,000. But also at this time, the software that she purchased for doing tax assessments resulted in litigation against her office, which she lost because she purchased software that failed to meet the state requirements on assessments, which again called into question her fiduciary judgment. Now in Shelby County, you know, most places have a legal waiting period between holding a position with a vendor and holding a position that can execute a contract with that vendor. Phillips worked for Everyone Counts, and then upon employment with Shelby County, she immediately issued an RFP for a voter registration system to Everyone Counts. She recommended for it for purchase, and it was purchased for $1.4 million. But it gets more concerning than that, because she selected a company that was in dire financial straits. I examined the RFP. She asked no questions about its financial condition. The company became insolvent within months of Shelby County's purchase. It was then sold to Votum, which quickly began restructuring to get rid of the very voter registration project she bought. Votum laid off the employees for Everyone Counts, which embroiled Votum in a deceptive practices lawsuit. Now, all this spills on the county and the fiduciary duty of the person who made this recommendation. Votum then turned over the product line to No Inc. And one thing for you local activists, all of this, according to the contract, they had to have written permission on each of these transfers, from Everyone Counts to Votum, from Votum to No Inc. So it'd be interesting to see those written documents. But Phillips put Shelby County taxpayers' money at grave risk for default. Also, she's admitted that her son works in the elections industry for a private vendor, but she has not disclosed the name. And so for these reasons, I recommend the following. I think Phillips needs to immediately disclose the name of her son and the name of the company he works for, along with any connection he has to Shelby County systems. Phillips' purchasing of the new system should be carefully watched, with particular attention to cost risks. She's been proposing a system that's 5 times as costly as the current system, but also a technology that's widely criticized and may end up getting outlawed before the end of its life cycle. I think also you should consider filing an ethics complaint with the Shelby County Ethics Commission regarding her purchase of a doomed system from her immediately previous employer. There is a 1-year waiting period in their code of ethics between employer vendor crossover. And the last thing is, and people have certainly criticized what she's said and the claims she'd made, I think that her past history would justify taking any claims that she makes in favor of a particular system or vendor with a grain of salt due to her past history of questionable fiduciary choices. And that's pretty much it in a nutshell, my assessment of the current situation.
Bev, thank you so much, Bev. This is really fascinating. All these speakers are so wonderful. I'm going to thank you again. I'm going to turn this back over to Erika Sugarmon, who's going to introduce 3 local experts and former and current election officials to dig more into these topics. And then they will be our last speakers. We will then be taking a few written questions if they've come in. And I will just tell you now, for anyone who's on this forum and has questions, when we actually end the forum, we're going to have an after party where if anyone, any of the experts who are willing to stay on the line for a while, or anyone who just wants to generally make a comment or ask a question, can stay to do that. So I will turn this now back over to Erika.
Thank you so much. Okay, so first up we have Norma Lester. She's a former Shelby County Election Commissioner, former Commissioner on Tennessee Registry of Election Finance, President of Democratic Women of Shelby County, Chair of Shelby County Democratic Primary Board. Welcome, Norma. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but can you hear me? That's been the problem.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, great. I tell you, I do not have any technical skills, and I was just really having a hissy fit over here, so I didn't know what was going on.
No worries. Go ahead.
Well, first of all, I just want to say that I am truly honored to be among this great panel with all this knowledge in electoral technology that I do not have. I have no technical expertise. But I've been really impressed with some of the things that I've heard. My background is in quality assurance. I was a quality assurance expert. So I'm very familiar with compliance, system development, and things of that nature. And these are the things that I've had a concern with. And I think Kevin said it, trust. When I first came on the Election Commission, it was after all that fiasco that happened in 2010. And the confidence and the trust was just completely lost. No one, both Republicans and Democrats, had any confidence in the Election Commission. And my major concern was the integrity of the process. It didn't matter whether it was a Republican or a Democrat. I just felt the election process should be a process that we should be proud of and should not be centered on any political agendas. But I first started having some concerns when it became very evident to me that the Democratic commissioners are not respected at all on the Election Commission. There are 5 bodies on there, but the role of the Democratic commissioners is just one of being patronized. You're only important when they get in trouble, then they want you to come as a united front as a body, but that is absolutely not true. And towards the end of my tenure, I was to the point where I was constantly making this known all the time. There would be unilateral decisions that would be made that we had no knowledge of. Even this machine, this was the very first one, was with the voter registration system. At that time, George Munger was on the commission with me, and we went on with the intentions of new machines. That's what everyone in Shelby County wanted, was new machines. And we went on with that, and there was an agreement with all 5 of us that we were going to get machines. Out of the clear blue sky in a meeting, here comes Richard Holden presenting us with a proposal from ES&S for new voter registration system. And it's like, where did this come from? And so asking him questions and whatever, he claims that they did it on their own. He didn't solicit it, and the whole 9 yards. And so I just really gave him a hard time about that. But then George Munger does a open records request. And in that request, we find that ES&S was sending Richard Holden information to put in an FRP to get the voter registration system. So that became the first concern that I have of them making unilateral decisions without including us. And then the next thing they did is they took the county employees from under the civil service system, and with no discussion. And we found that out by that time. Commissioner Tate was on the commission with me, and we just happened to find this out in a conference that was the coordinator of elections did not know that he was telling us something that we didn't know, because he was presenting it that Shelby County had done this. And the reason why is because the employees were treated so badly that personnel in the county system was just getting inundated. And so every time Richard did something and the employees saw the complaint, the employees were always right and they get reinstated. So Richard wanted the ability to be able to hire and fire as he wished. And so they decided to go in and pull the employees out from under the civil service. So which was very heartbreaking for the employees because they didn't understand it. They didn't have any prior knowledge or anything. They just knew one day they did not have it. And then the other thing that was an issue for me, an employee was fired after being there for 13 years, had been seen on television down there by herself, handling things when there was a crisis. And out of the clear blue sky, one morning she comes to work and she's fired. Well, you know, things can happen. She could have done something justifiable to be fired, but I wanted to see the documentation. There was no documentation. Well, the thing that concerned me about this is that when they went out from under the county system, it was agreed among the commissioners that they would adhere to the county personnel policies. They obviously did not. And so when I started having a hissy fit about this, Steve Thompson at the time says that we're going to develop one. And I'm asking him, but why are we treating this lady like this? And so his only explanation was because what Linda Phillips said. Well, you know, but the documentation didn't support it. Her file did not have anything in it. So when I started applying pressure, they submit a file, which I'm sure this lady would not mind me sharing this file with anyone. But it was nothing. It was 2 pages of garbage that they wrote after the fact that the lady was fired. Never any documentation where there's been any counseling, anything. So I questioned him about that. I felt it was very unfair. But then I thought, you know, as a commissioner, that they would at least respect me enough to allow the lady to tender her resignation rather than tarnish her record after being there for 13 years. And they wouldn't even do that, which I felt was an insult that they refused to do that, because with a Republican employee that Linda fired, she did allow that Republican employee to resign. So that was another issue of disrespect that I felt. And then in 2018, when they decided that they were going to change these precincts, and the chairperson at that time, Robert Myers, states that he told Linda Phillips in January to do this, never discussed it with any of us. We find out in July, which I just so happened to be somewhere else. I wasn't even here at the time when it all surfaced. And there had never been any discussion. And the thing that was so bad about that there was no reason to do this in secret. We would have been very happy to sit down with them and talk about precincts. We'd done that before, and it was the first time it had ever been happened where we brought in the community. In fact, I had Benny come in, and he was very successful. And I had the community come in, and everybody was pleased with the end result. So why they chose to do this in secret, it just absolutely did not make any sense to me. So it was like everything that we tried to do with them, they refused to acknowledge us as a body. I'm on record of stating in the meetings that Trey Haggard needed to come down and explain what is the role of the Democratic and Republican commissioners, because it is definitely not the same. We are supposed to, I guess, go in a corner and sit down and shut up until they get in trouble and then come out like we're all happy. And it's just unreal, the difference in how the Democratic commissioners, you can ask for something until you blue in the face and you won't get it. I mean, to the point when I would say, are you telling me that you're not going to honor this request? Even if it's a violation of a statute and you're asking for something, they feel that you're not entitled to it. And I understand at one meeting that Linda Phillips said that she did not trust Benny Smith, who is a commissioner, that's her boss, and she's going to make this here kind of statement, which is very insulting in my opinion. So I think, you know, until the trust is gained, we're going to continue to have issues in Shelby County, and it really doesn't. We're talking about the hand mark. It's not going to matter because they've already received a letter from Senator Brian Kelsey for them to go with the other ballots, and that's how they're going to vote. So, and it's unfortunate for me that no one on the county commission is not here to hear some of the things that are being said, particularly the things that Dev has said, because that's the only way that anything is going to happen. Those ballots that the machines that they want, those are the machines that they're going to get. Some other issues that I had is we were trying to get demographic information that even Richard Holden was able to do for us on a regular basis, because in Shelby County, everything centers around race, politics, and religion. And it's just important to us that on election day, people, I mean, not on the election day, but during the election process, people wanted to know how many Republicans, how many Democrats, how many blacks, how many, it's just something that we've gotten used to doing. And when I inquired about that, Linda was not able to do that. And so I asked her, well, why was she not able to do it? And Richard was able to do it. And even Benny was able to give us some information that he got from the Election Commission in order for us to do it. And she said that Richard Holden was able to do it because he was remoting in. And I'm thinking, well, why is he remoting in from home or wherever he's remoting? I mean, why is this happening? So that opened up another can of worms. And for me, again, not being someone that has any technical skills, I did thought that was really an issue, that
Richard
someone is remoting from the outside. Pardon me?
Because Richard was still from his mother, so I know that he shouldn't have been remoting in.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, like I said, you certainly know how limited my technical skills are, but I just thought that this was very strange that he was able to do that. And then things just got so bad. It's very hard for people in Shelby County to trust this election commission, and it really doesn't matter what kind of system they get. People are not going to trust them. There were things that I felt sometimes was just vindictive, and that was cruel. Things that had been going on forever and had never been an issue, like we had an issue with using the bathroom. There may have been a law on the book about using the bathroom for poll workers, but it had never been enforced. And it's just unfortunately, and I'm not one who always follow the laws completely, but I don't break them, I bend them. But if you're going to take away something that's been allowed forever, I would think that you would at least give people notice that from now on, you're not going to be able to go into the bathroom. And they didn't, so they were taken to court, and the court says these people can go to the bathroom. And then here comes another issue, whereas people have been putting out their signs at the polling sites. There's not been any issues other than, they have too many of them. But then at 3 o'clock one evening, when it's almost time for the polls to close, they're hassling people about having signs at doors that weren't even going to be used. The back door, the side doors that were not even accessible, that they were having a problem with people having signs at those areas. And so again, it was like, if you're going to change these rules, let people know that the rules are going to be changed. But the biggest issue that I have now is the disrespect that continues to go on with the Democratic commissioners versus the Republicans. And I think Chris said that Linda Phillips usurped her authority, not in her standards, because in Shelby County, there is a perception of 5 commissioners, but I can assure you there is 6, and that 6th commissioner is the administrator and the Republican commissioners, and that was the same thing that was true with Richard Holden. A lot of times we didn't know what was going on, and what was really surprising is that Robert Myers, he was always telling the public how transparent we wanted to be, instead of saying we are transparent, but it's selective transparent. We transplant what we want you to know and the rest that you don't. And so I would think that there would be an emphasis if you're in a predominantly Democratic county and you are Republican, that you try to establish a relationship of trust. And it seems like to them it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether you trust us or not. It's more of an authoritative thing. And until we're able to do that, I think that we're going to continue to have problems here. I think that we're going to have to educate the public because they're going to have a responsibility to kind of stay on top of things. Everything that's been happening, and that was another thing that I brought before them, it always seemed to happen in the predominantly Black neighborhoods. The majority of the problems that we have with the machines, or no matter what it was. And I had a concern about that, and I voiced that concern because it's very hard for us to understand why we're the ones who are always having these issues. And unfortunately, the voters had no evidence. And so when they said something was happening and they bring it to our attention, well, they had no evidence, so naturally what they said didn't matter. But it just so happened this one year, something that has been happening all the time, it's happened while one of the city council people were there. In fact, this person is now the chair, and she happened to be in the poll at that particular time when this situation happened. And when she brought it before the commission, they could not deny it, because there we had somebody who was very credible, who definitely knew about the machines and knew the system, and there was no explanation for it. Another issue is when I had a person contact me because the lady had voted on the machine, but she never showed up on the PVL. So that was a concern. And so when I brought that before the commission, they said, you know, this was this new voting system, which, by the way, I adamantly opposed anything ES&S. And I made that clear from the very beginning. So maybe that's why there was ever no mention of ESS and this other company that they ended up with, because there was just too much happening with ESS and that company that should not have been happening and was not happening in any other places across the state.
Norma, may I ask you a question, Norma? And we're going to have to move on to our next speaker in a minute. I think we could tape an entire forum with you, so we might have to come back and do that. So thank you so much for your comments about what's going on. Could you just answer one quick thing for me? One of my perceptions about the commission is that often they are pawns in a process of other people trying to get something done. Then when the lawsuits happen, that the commission, you know, it's against the commission, and they're you know, under fire for what's happened, even if it's not their fault. But then when big decisions are made, that the things are just sort of ramrodded through, like is happening this time. Does that happen generally?
Yes, it does. It does. I mean, it just out of the clear blue sky, these things that will happen, and you never know what hits you. I mean, it just comes up, and then when somebody makes a lawsuit or other kind of issue, that's when you become aware. And I don't know when that's going to ever change. I think that I hold the state responsible for this, knowing the issues that we're having, that somebody's not coming down here doing something about what's happening in Shelby County.
Okay, thank you so much. We appreciate that.
Thank you, Norma.
Thank you.
Is to have opportunity to inform, educate voters, as well as elected officials alike who are not aware of the situation. And having said that, the voters do want hand-marked paper ballots, and I believe we're going to get hand-marked paper ballots, but they also need to be educated that they're secure. And the fact that, yes, you mark in a ballot, but the ballot isn't scanned. Then the image is taken when it's scanned. So then you have a digital copy, and you actually have the ballot itself. So you do have the evidence, the evidence and things of that nature. And so this is the whole point of this forum, is to inform and educate and to protect an election that is secure and transparent. Having said that, we're going to move on to the next speaker real quickly, Attorney Mulroy. He is also a university professor, law professor. Attorney Mulroy, are you still there?
I am, but I was wondering if I might be able to defer to Commissioner Smith, if that's okay.
Yes.
And go after him? Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Commissioner Benny Smith, he's currently serves on the commission, and he's also very knowledgeable about secure elections. Benny Smith, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. Thank you guys for coming down. Oh man, there's so many. I see all these family members. I'm usually, it's so weird because I'm sitting on the other side as a commissioner, but I'm usually going around with Bev and Mimi Kennedy. I'm so surprised to see Mimi here. Hey, Mimi. There are about, if you guys have seen the new HBO documentary, full disclosure, there are about 5 or 6 people here that were noted in the thank you sections for giving input about the election. So we have a wealth of election knowledge here. However, I really want to speak more. I was actually going to do a demonstration, but I kind of decided against it because Norma kind of jerked my chain a little bit. The current problems that I'm having, and I'm really interested in Mrs. Fisher's take on it. I want to clear some things up. I think Tilda need to do that as election commissioner. The way I understand it, what we are supposed to be discussing in executive session is just the relevant cost information, not deliberation or anything. That was directive that we got from Danielle Inez at the mayor's office. She instructed the attorneys to just give us the pertinent cost information. And the way I understand it, we are going to mull over that cost information so that we can be informed in a vendor selection. And then we would be voting to go with a vendor solely so we can release the RFP information to the public. And that's supposed to be pending a second vote. Once that information is released, then the public can see the cost information, and then we'll go back and decide on a voting selection. That is the way that I understood it. However, sitting in that element, be as it may, I am still not in receipt of any cost information. And this is a directive that we got from the purchasing department. It's a directive that I've read in email. It went to the attorneys, and everybody's impression, and I think Ms. Fisher, I listened to her on the podcast, she's like, the public should have it. And it's shocking to me because everybody, it's no secret that I'm reasonably versed in elections. There's no secret about that. Commissioner Lester was the person that I reached out to when the anomalies I discovered happened in Shelby County. And the clip that John Brakey was going to play, I never heard it before, but it was the administrator saying that the commissioners sit outside a glass window and watch the entire process. It's not entirely true, because I remember when Commissioner Lester was a commissioner, I could go back there where the tabulator was. I didn't go in the tabulator room, but it was open and she could go, and they did everything. She called me there frequently. I felt like a commissioner at one point, because she would ask me to come and present information to the commission all the time. And the redistricting, how things went, they were kind of knee-jerk and looking at zip codes instead of looking at turnout for how they were selecting things. And she would call me all the time. So I had this morbid understanding of two different administrations. Many would argue that it was the poll tape that ushered Administrator Phillips in. So, you know, she really does loathe me. I don't hold it against her. I am asking, very different questions of her, but she did say in a public meeting that she just doesn't trust me. I'm not trying to be her boyfriend anyway. So my wife's name is Linda, so I don't get any bad emotions when I hear her name. So that my wife told me to say that, by the way. So I really don't need her to trust me. I need her to understand that what I'm asking for, I'm asking as a duly appointed commissioner. Two of my bosses are on the call. And the way I understand it, I'm supposed to be the person that is the governing body along with the four other commissioners. And for an entire year, she has not given me anything that I've asked for. I've asked for a lot of things. I've asked for them on the record. I've sent it to the state. I don't get any support from the state. I've asked for a lot of things. And up and down, if we just go to the RFP, the current RFP process, we just look at the current RFP process. I said, I need, before I go into executive session, the materials. I don't get the materials. So then I did get some material information, but didn't have anything that I can make a decision with. And when I spoke with purchasing said this is basic information that really everybody should be provided. So that's kind of the state of where things are. It feels a lot like a very obstructive process. I think it's a really personality conflict. If I had to be diplomatic, I say it's perfect personality conflict where I'm not seen as an authoritarian or the authority of record as Norma Lester would say. But there are a number of things that I've asked for that I've gotten traveling with the rest of you guys as a non-member of anybody. and I can't get those as a sitting commissioner. And the dismissive tone that comes across is when I ask for something, the response from our administrator is that's not available to the public. And that really disturbs me because I'm not the public. Like I don't need to do it for you. I'm the administrative body. If there is a personnel matter, then I'm the person that's supposed to do it. So I've been.
Excuse me, Commissioner Smith, I have a quick question. Who holds the power? Is she accountable to the board, or is the board accountable to the administrator? Because what I'm hearing is that you all are accountable to her. And so when things are wrong, when there are lawsuits brought up, we're going to hold you guys responsible. So
right, our names go on the lawsuit. Section 212.116 is the enumerated authorities that gives the election commissioners all of its authorities, and that statute says that we have the duty to appoint her. So if we can appoint her, then we can unappoint her. so we are definitely the governing body. There is no mistake about that in my mind. However, that is not how it's received. I will say that when I went to TACIO, it's the Tennessee Association of County Election Officials. That is the state. It's a state convention. Most of the commissioners don't go to it. Norma Lester, when I succeeded her, she said, "Make sure you go," and I went. And it was a 2 or 3 day conference. And y'all got to consider this. Tennessee is a red state, be it as it may. But those were all mostly Republican election commissioners that were there. But the first directive that was given was, no matter how it looks, we assure you that you are the governing body and the administrators report to you. That was the first directive that I got when I was in there. And they said that no matter how much they press, this is all your responsibility. And if you look at the statutes, I can just say that I've been asking of my attorneys about the clarification of one statute for the better part of a year. And I have not gotten an answer for those attorneys. I get them in bits. Well, I've gotten answers, but it was bits and pieces, basically saying, well, you're right about section 1, but you're not right about section 6. But the entire section is telling me what my responsibilities are. So there is a lot of conflict in that respect. It's frustrating. Obviously, I am advocating hand-marked paper ballots, being one of the only people to hack an election successfully and prove how it's done. I wear that as a badge of honor. I did it with Bev Harris and John Brakey. That's how we met. But since traveling the country, I've come back to try to do what I do nationally to my own county, and it's really troubling to me to see the rejection, or it's not rejection. It's just the blatant disregard for the authority in the statutes that I've been given. So I figured if I was supposed to change it, I was supposed to change it from within. So I joined the commission. That's the only reason why I joined the commission, right? I don't want the money that they give me. I don't even want the work that I have to do. But I knew that it was important to deliver for my county something that I think that is beneficial for the citizens of Shelby County. But when I got on that, the resistance that I got was what was disturbing for me. And I would ask for things that I know that Commissioner Monger, who's on this call, he had already shown me times where he had got the same information, and they would basically tell me I can't get the budget, but I'm supposed to approve the budget. I can't get audit logs. I can't get a litany of things that I'm supposed to have access to. And I've been asking the attorneys to clarify this, and they just haven't done it. So I'm definitely interested to hear what Ms. Fisher has to say about some of this. So I got some questions. I just wanted to speak just the current state of how things are now. I will be able to say to you guys that purchasing responded to an email that I just sent a little while ago, and I think Danielle Inez, who is the assistant to the mayor, she basically said he's asking for basic information he should be provided about things that I've been told that I can't have unless I'm in executive session. So that is something that just literally happened. Y'all see me look. I got 6 screens. Y'all see me looking around. I was literally checking those emails because I've been fighting this thing tooth and nail. I get that I'm obviously a beacon of hand-marked paper ballots all over me, and that is problematic if you're on the affirmative of that argument. However, I'm in an entitled role to do what I'm doing. And what we have is our administrator who has given a presentation to another governing body. And basically she stated that 100%, like 100% of fraud has happened with hand-marked paper ballots. Now, if you lived in Shelby County, I think I would quote, because I've seen this email from Commissioner Mulroy. He said, if you've been in Shelby County for 15 years, you know that ain't right. So I could just take my own experience where one precinct that I looked at had 548 votes, but when it was tabulated, it was 330. So that's obviously an error of some kind that's with the machines. After Bloomberg, which is a national organization, came down and wrote about it, they determined that it was over 1,100 votes. And Commissioner Lester at the time was livid about it. So there's at least 1,100 votes that make that incorrect. And I do statistics and analytics. And the one thing I know not to say is that you can do 100% of anything. So she's allegedly said that on the record. And I think she's supposed to be sending a letter in writing, to which I will definitely be shredding that in our meeting, because that is just flagrant. And you know, I applaud everybody who's brought this information. I didn't know very much about her past, and I obviously I can't speak on what her past is. But what Ms. Harris is saying about this fiduciary duty, I've had questions about this election system, right? I've criticized this election system for an entire year. We are told that race doesn't matter. People don't fill it out. Nonetheless, she used race to calculate the error rate. And I want to know her statistical method. You can't just start dividing stuff. There is a lot that goes into it. I don't know how many ballots. I don't know what her sample size was. She needs some upper and lower control limits. I need to know if she ran it multiple times. When you do stuff like this, you go through hundreds of thousands of simulations before you get an actual number. It sounds like she just counted it once. And that is very disturbing to hear something like that. So I mean, I can talk all night too about this stuff, but it is very hard to sit on this commission and know what your enumerated authority is and see it just completely rejected on its face, right in public. So we need more sunlight in Shelby County.
Benny, thank you. That is wonderful. And Benny, just like Norma, we could tape you for the entire session in the after party if people have questions, because both of your talks are so enlightening about things that are going on behind the scenes at the Election Commission. And this, part of this forum is to give information to the people of Shelby County and also to give them a voice. So, people can start showing up at Election Commission meetings. There is an Election Commission meeting this Thursday at 5 p.m. Central Time, your time in Shelby County. You'll be able to register for that like you did this forum and be able to call in and make your voice heard. So please do that, because when the citizens raise their voices, then we become we the people and be the we, and we need to do that, and Shelby County definitely needs that. So Erika, would you like to?
Is this a special meeting or is this their regular meeting? When is their regular meeting?
We have no idea.
This is a special meeting. This Thursday at 5 p.m. It's about the voting system, and so this about what this whole forum is about. And so please, everybody, do be there, and you will be allowed to speak for 3 minutes, each person who calls in or goes in on Zoom like you did today. So, so I'll turn this back over to Erika to go back to our last speaker who deferred to Benny. But Erika, do you want to introduce Steve again?
Yeah. Yes, we have Steve Mulroy. He is a law professor at the University of Memphis. Okay, Mulroy, you ready?
Yes, thank you very much. Buenas noches y feliz de Cinco de Mayo a todos.
Yeah.
I'm very honored to be here among all these great personages. I want to thank the elected officials like Representative Hardaway and Thompson who've been with us. And it's great to be with so many nationally recognized experts. It really is a who's who in the election security area. I mean, just to be on the same town hall or meeting as Bev Harris and Jennifer Cohn, and really all the people. I don't want to include some and then exclude others. I also want to say, you know, we have an awful lot of complaints about local officials. I do want to commend some. I want to commend the majority of the Shelby County Commission, who have in fact passed several resolutions in favor of hand-marked paper ballots, including a very bold one a few weeks ago that invoked their authority under state law to sort of take over the process and just directly buy equipment for items for hand-marked paper ballots. That's still in process. And obviously Commissioner Smith and also Commissioner Brent Taylor, who's a member of the Republican majority, but really has been very bold in trying to push for transparency in this process. So I want to, you know, give some credit where that's due. I'm not going to, so much of what has been said, you know, needed to be said, and I don't want to be duplicative of it. I will point out that Deborah Fisher made a lot of good points about the secrecy of the RFP response information. Why is this bidding information so secret? I won't repeat what she said. I will point out, though, that we have at various times pointed out several different methods by which they could make this information public in complete compliance with the state law provisions that they're citing. One of them is the very system that Knox County actually used 1 year ago here in Tennessee, which was to pass the scoring information on to the administration, which would then issue an intent to award letter, which would then release all of the RFP response info, the bid info, so we'd have a completely open and transparent process pre-decision, before the Election Commission voted. If it could be done in Knox County, there's no reason why it couldn't be done in Shelby County. They just didn't want to do it. There was also what I'll call the Taylor plan, Brent Taylor's suggestion, where we have two different Shelby County votes, a provisional one which would release the information, and then another one, another one which would allow for an open vote. Are we still, am I still on? Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I apologize. I blanked out there for a second. And then also one that Ms. Fisher mentioned where Ms. Phillips would issue the intent to award letter herself. So not one, not two, but three different certifiably legal ways of making this process open. It's not that their hands are tied, it's that they don't want to be transparent. You've also heard about some fishy situations going on with the SEEC attorney John Ryder sharing office space with a lobbyist for what we think is the leading bidder, and Ms. Phillips, who, you know, within a year of leaving one company's employ and joining the SEEC, went ahead and recommended that that company get a lucrative $1.4 million contract, even though that company at the time was not certified by the state of Tennessee to do any of this. And of course, it was going bankrupt. In both cases, you may be able to say that technically there may not have been an actual violation of any conflict of interest proceedings. Maybe we can argue it either way. I don't want to get into that argument. I just want to make the point that in both instances, those relationships should have been disclosed at the time, and they weren't. And there's really no excuse for them not to be disclosed. And all it does is add to the ever-growing pile of examples of a lack of transparency in this process, which undermines public confidence in the integrity of the process. If there is one area where we need public confidence, it's in our election system. And we are going out of our way to undermine that public confidence, not only by having no paper trail for the last 15 years, but all of these problems with transparency and shumminess and a lack of disclosure. I will say that I want to echo what Commissioner Lester said about there was a decision made a few years ago to actually go towards new voting machines, and then suddenly, without warning, there was this pivot to a registration system, and we know all the problems that occurred with that. Commissioner Lester told you that the registration system that Linda Phillips eventually got us to buy has been plagued with problems ever since. I will tell you that I was actually on the county commission a few years back at that relevant time, and I successfully got us to adopt hand-marked paper ballots at the time by the county commission, and to put money in the budget to fund it. And yet, for reasons which are shrouded in secrecy, they again pivoted towards the registration system, and we're still here today, 15 years later, debating hand-marked paper ballots. Pivoting from the process issues to the substance, I'm not going to repeat what's been said. I'll just point out that early on, Linda Phillips' big talking points against why we shouldn't have hand-marked paper ballots was that you couldn't work it in a big county like Shelby. And it wouldn't work in early voting where you had 100 different ballot faces. People would be walking into satellite early voting locations from all over the county. You couldn't have 100 different stacks of paper ballots to choose from. You don't hear about that much from them anymore because we kept pointing out that there were many, many counties as big in population or bigger than Shelby, Baltimore, Boston, virtually every large county in Florida that uses hand-marked paper ballots, including during early voting, without any problem. And that's because they have what we've pointed out are the ballot on demand printers where you walk in and you say, I'm in precinct 46-3, they type it in, out comes a printed paper ballot and you're good to go. So they've given up on those arguments. We've been hearing a lot about cost. You've already heard from John Brakey just how ridiculous those cost estimates are. Part of it is that Linda Phillips builds into her cost estimates the idea that you will need 4 extra polling place officials per precinct who do nothing but handle the paper ballots. There's absolutely no basis for that assertion. We cannot find a single hand-marked paper ballot jurisdiction that actually has had to do that, and yet Ms. Phillips presents it as gospel so that she can avoid having to explain why she wants a system that is less secure and twice as expensive. The voter error you've heard about, I'll just mention, she's also been mentioning recently the new talking point is voter fraud associated with paper ballots. You heard Commissioner Smith talk a little bit about that. I'll just point out that I did an article in the national publication just a few weeks ago at Hill, in which I did a study of the Heritage Foundation's database. Now, the Heritage Foundation is a right-wing think tank that wants to promote the idea that voter fraud in general and paper voter fraud in particular is a national problem, a big problem. So they would be inclined to include every instance they could. I took a look at their database and controlling for population and time period, paper ballot related fraud is rare everywhere, but it is actually more common in strict absentee ballot states like Tennessee that crack down on paper ballots, and less rare in no excuse absentee voting jurisdictions or universal vote by mail jurisdictions. So the idea that either voter error or voter fraud is a valid reason to go for a system that is half as secure and twice as expensive is truly farcical. I'll end with a call to action. You've already heard from Susan Pinchon that we have this election commission meeting coming this Thursday. If we could go ahead, maybe in somewhere in the chat, put up the link for that or some of the details so that we can get to it. If you can show up at Thursday evening to do that in live and make a comment in favor of hand-marked paper ballots, that'd be great. If not, I've put in the chat the email address. If you could distribute that email address between now and Thursday, get as many people as you can to email in support of hand-marked paper ballots. We do have a chance. I think there are some on the Election Commission that might be open-minded. We do have a chance to get them to make the right decision. And of course, if they don't, then we have to rely on the County Commission to save us and do the right thing. I'll conclude with this. Those of you who know me from Memphis know that one of my trademark is a limerick. So I'll give you a Cinco de Mayo limerick to end tonight. It's time for a cleansing of palate. Smash this secrecy with a big mallet. Make elections clean and pure and vote totals secure. Let's adopt hand-marked paper ballots. Thank you very much.
Oh, Steve, he is known for that.
Yes, that's fabulous, Steve. Thank you so much. And by the way, the invitation to the meeting where you can register is at shelbyvote.com. It's right on the front page of the Election Commission website. So anyone who wants to register can go to shelbyvote.com and you'll be able to register. Well, thank you so much to all our speakers. This was absolutely fabulous. What a wonderful mix of information and revelation. And I feel educated and enlightened, and I hope people are ready for action also. So we're going to stay. We're going to end the session now, but some of us will stay. Whoever would like to stay.
I would like to just say, that I'm very hopeful, and I believe that we're going to get hand-marked paper ballots. And I also want to say they're going to get mail-in ballots during the COVID-19. So
First mention of COVID-19.
Yes.
okay. And I want to challenge everybody that's here tonight, not only to register for the meeting on Thursday, but also call in with your concerns. Also take your concerns to the mayor and the county commissioners, because I believe this is going to be taken out of the hands of this administrator who is ramrodding the commissioners and the election commissioners, such as Benny Smith and Taylor and Anthony Tate. And I think that she's going to be in for a rude awakening. And that's my prediction. Thank you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Good night. And stay
Good night,
on
yeah.
now for anyone who wants to stay, and we'll take some questions.
All right, thank you, Susan.
I got a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
I have a question. I sat and listened to all of y'all
Who is
speak.
that? Who is
This is Miss Moses.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. I want to know, what is the plan? We supposed to call and tell them don't do this. I'm just, what is the plan to stop what they're trying to do? Do you understand how important this is? You know, for someone who can't vote, I understand the importance of it, but I didn't hear any clear directions other call them. What is the plan if that doesn't work? If we got lawyers on here, who's gonna sue?
Well, we're hoping that lots of sunshine on this process and people calling in to support hand-marked paper ballots, and people listening to this forum. Now, there's going to be a link to this forum. I need to find out what website so that you can share it with your friends. If someone, Train or John, would like to speak up and answer that. So you
Susan?
Yes.
I just mentioned that I am working with some other lawyers about potential legal remedies regarding the ability to use mail ballots in Tennessee. I'm not really ready to say anything yet, but there are people that are working on that, and there's actually already been a federal lawsuit already filed for that remedy.
Yeah, that was the Equity Alliance. Yeah. Well, that's all I wanted to know. I appreciate all of y'all for, having this and allowing me to participate. And I hope y'all read all the comments in the chats, because I mean, everything on there is the truth, and my credibility is good. And I hope that y'all stop them for what they're trying to do.
No, Ms. Moses, we're going to stop them, okay?
Okay, well, that sounds good. We'll stop them.
Okay, thank you.
Moses, thank you so
everybody.
much.
If everybody can hear me, this is Train DePriest, the technical director, and I just wanted to share that the URL, which will allow you to share this entire presentation, this entire meeting, will be emailed to each of you afterwards. So we're going to do a little editing, add a few graphics. For example, John Brakey's presentation wasn't able to be seen, so I'm going to put the presentation into it and then send it all out to you probably early tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, this is John Brakey. Once I get it, then I will break it down by speaker, load it on YouTube, and then we'll have links that you can share each of your individual, because that's how people, I know that, I want to hear what she says, and they get interested in the topic. So we'll be able to share it that way. And I just want to thank everybody. It's been a real experience for me to jump into this April 1st to all of a sudden be on a call and listen to the insanity and what was going on. And I just also want to send a special thanks out to Bev Harris. We go back many, many years, me and Bev. Chris Sauter, thank you. And what Chris is working on next, and also John Fitzpatrick's on the call, is that we're trying to get to some federal legislators. What we see happening in Shelby, we find in other states. It's important that we connect back with the people in Pennsylvania because we want to show the intent of how ES&S is manipulating the system, and what they're doing. I believe that Linda had a relationship with ES&S when she was in Tippecanoe, Indiana, because when Diebold sold, they sold to ES&S. The Justice Department jumped in and said, no, you can't do that. So they sold off the intellectual property, but they kept all the accounts. And then they knew they were going to buy big equipment, so they wined and dined these people. They take them to Vegas. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Okay? It's really an interesting thing that Chris and John are working on, trying to expose, that we'll be releasing the letter soon, looking for other big weights to jump on the letter and get to their legislators. Because democracy, we do need to make it matter again. Thank you.
Thank you,
I will mention, this is Bev, that when Linda was in Indiana, this woman is a big spender. And I think that's something you guys can work with. Okay, she started with Diebold, which became ES&S, and she bought, before anyone was even buying them, she bought the touchscreens, and then they were the first generation of touchscreens, and they were bad. So she had to rebuy. She bought a whole bunch of them for millions in 2000, and then in 2002, she rebought all of them, the whole new generation. This woman is a disaster with money. You know, she cannot, she spends too much, she buys bad stuff that consistently doesn't pass muster, and then she has to redo the buy. So, and that's something that everybody gets, Republicans and Democrats. You guys can't afford it. You know, you're not, your tax revenue with the pandemic is toast right now. You cannot afford to mess this up. And so you got to go with somebody who's, you know, look into the way this woman handles money. I also put in the chat that there was an election official in California who was dislodged after a forensic audit. That is something that people can ask for. If it gets super frustrating, you can say, okay, we want this woman audited. We want to audit our election office. And just the heat that gets put on that, the media gets very, very interested in that too, can dislodge an election official when they're a problem. And I think she will show problems in an audit.
Wow.
Bev Harris is correct.
Okay. That somebody spoke up and just agreed. I got a question for Jenny. Jenny, I did not, I remembered at the time, but I wasn't really versed with the election commission at the time. I was really just a citizen, and Norma's like a mother to me. So when she said jump, I say hi. So she was asking me some stuff, but when she sent out to the administrator, and she's not, you know, somebody who's going to be trying to figure out how to hack a moon landing. So when the administrator told her that our former administrator was remoting in from wherever to, I immediately thought of you because I'd read all your articles about remote software, and I didn't know that it applied to Shelby County. Can you tell us about the remote side? Because I know what remote software does. I just remoted. Hey, I just remoted into Norma's computer to get her mic to work. So that was something that I was doing. This screen right here is how I was working on her computer from here. So I know a lot about remote software. And that's definitely not something you want happening during an election.
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. I mean, that was definitely something that I took note of while I've been making notes of things that I sort of hope people will take away from this. And one is just concerns with this particular vendor, which is ES&S. And I don't think, I put here the headline of the story that was broken by Kim Zetter in, looks like it was in July of 2018.
Is that what she presented to us in Berkeley?
What's that?
Is that what she presented to us in Berkeley?
It was part of it. I'm sure she, I'm sure she mentioned it. But she's the one who broke the story. I just have amplified it nonstop on Twitter. I came with a lot of Bev Harris's findings. So this wasn't something I found, but it was one of the things that really has made my jaw drop more than most. And it's having the ability to remote into the central tabulators. And this is like the treasure chest. If you want to flip an election, the central tabulator is sort of your one-stop shop. It's where for the county, it aggregates all of the precinct totals. Or if you're in some places at the state, so like with Georgia, it would be at the state. But so in Shelby County, apparently this was also Bev's group. They discovered remote access software in 2006, which was something I learned only recently. And yeah, Norma Lester, we all heard her say tonight that Richard Holden, who was the election administrator when the FBI was investigating the Shelby County Election Commission, that he was remoting into this system. it's a very much a red flag. It was a huge headline, probably one of the biggest election security headlines, I'd say, of the last 2 years, was ES&S had finally admitted that it installed this remote access software into the central tabulators because it had denied it for many years. And in fact, when Kim Zetter broke this story, they had only admitted to a handful of customers. They were being non-specific. And then shortly thereafter, to NPR, they admitted that it was actually 300 customers and it wouldn't identify any of them. But there have been public interest groups and advocates, including Bev Harris and Jim March, who worked with her, who discovered the remote access in Shelby County. It's stunning. It means that someone can just remote in during an election, see how things are going, and then change the results at the last second. And so for many years, for example, people would scoff at the notion that, that say the 2000 and 2004 elections were electronically manipulated, saying that you'd have to go into every single voting machine. But guess what? You don't have to if someone, an insider, can vote into these central tabulators. So it's a really big deal.
Yeah, this is Bev here. And also in 2010, when Susan and I were there, if you watch the Fraction Magic video, I show the audio of a deposition by Dennis Boyce, who was the Shelby County technician. And they were using WebEx. And basically, just like Benny just did with Norma, they were able to come in and take total control of the computer. Mm-hmm. And they actually put in a new electronic poll book database, I believe, or he said they ran a script on the data, which Benny can tell you what that means.
Yeah,
but yeah, they were using WebEx, and that's actually in a deposition.
Wow. Yeah, that's really...
Well, let me share this with you guys if you really want to have something to croak on. I always try to be, as Benny mentioned, back in the tabulator room so I can see what's happening. And this one night I get there to go in the room, and guess what? The only person that had the key to the room was ES&S. And that's who let me in to the tabulator room, the ES&S. There wasn't anyone else in there but him. And I mean, I just couldn't believe it. And to top it off, this same guy was the guy that picture was in the media where he had gotten arrested for DUI in the middle of the night in Fraser, like about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And of course, his boss did not know that, and I took great pride in being able to produce this in the middle of a meeting, which everyone there almost had a heart attack. And I say that is the fact that this is the caliber and this is the type of people that they were turning over our system to, even access to our tabulator room.
Yeah, and something else I wanted to point out that I forgot to mention is that ES&S has donated $30,000 to the Republican State Legislative Committee since 2014. So they've got a conflict of interest there. Incredibly inappropriate behavior by this particular vendor. Remote access, they put wireless modems into precinct-based scanners in 2015, so just before the 2016 election. This is very concerning, shady behavior, and I think this is a vendor that the county would do well to avoid, whether it goes with a hand-marked paper ballot system or a touchscreen system. I think this is
I agree.
Yeah, if you want to increase confidence in elections, I don't think you stick with the same voting machine vendor that has had these types of conflicts of interest. I just wanted to show people to really drive home the conflict of interest involving the lobbyist in the state. I have the image here. I mean, this was so here's the image of what's on the door of, so MNA is ES&S's lobbyist. And you have John Ryder down here at the bottom. It's kind of blurry, but he is the attorney for the Shelby County Election Commission. Again, ES&S lobbyist and the attorney for the Shelby County Election Commission, all shown on the building under as being in the same suite, and he's listed under the names of several of the ES&S lobbyists. So that
was a shocker. That was a shocker. I mean,
it's really
John Ryder is brilliant when it comes to election law, and I cannot believe that he would not disclose something like that. That was a total shocker.
And
that Memphis Flyer, Jackson Baker is on the call. I mean, he's on the call. He was the one that wrote this, right?
Yes. That's right.
Oh, Jackson.
Yeah, Jackson Baker.
Good article, Jackson.
And Erika's daughter took that picture of the directory. Erika, who's the co-moderator, her daughter actually took those pictures down in Nashville of John Ryder's name under the lobby.
Oh, great.
Well, Jackson, I bet you got a lot of content in here.
A lot of what, Benny?
You want to say something, Jackson?
Jackson has got a lot of content tonight.
Yeah, there'll be a follow-up article. Keep your eyes open.
Yeah, something else that I was really stunned to learn tonight that I hadn't known was that we don't even know what election company Linda Phillips's son works for. That's the opposite of transparent. We're just in the dark about this, and I think that really needs to be resolved before, I hope, any vote takes place.
I will say I did ask that question. I probably could do a follow-up question with it. I did ask that. I got approached from some local people here that was saying it, and I was like, look, I want to stay in my commissioner lane. I really want to stay focused on the voting, but I will ask the question. So I asked the question, and I did not get an answer of her former employer. That just came out tonight. I did learn about it before tonight, but that came out tonight. I did have questions about the voting, the election software that we use now. It is terrible, and I don't even think the employees like it. But just a basic tip.
Is it working? It hasn't worked.
Right.
Is it working?
That I know, that was the part of knowledge that you gave to me when I assumed the commissioner role. So I was just following up from that. But it's a very subpar system. I could have learned how to build it for $250,000, and they paid $1 million for it to come in.
Well, back on the big spender ticket here. What's happened is it got sold to Votem, and Votem sold it to No Ink. And No Ink is a fairly stable company, but they have a completely different system. So watch for it. You're going to be buying or upgrading to the No Ink, which might work better, but it's going to cost you another arm and a leg. This is what I mean. This woman keeps buying. Either she buys the wrong stuff and has to buy it again, or
a lot of problems actually. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, pardon?
No Ink has had some problems with its.
Yeah, I know. But it's not bankrupt.
Massive problems with their pullbacks.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not. Well, the problem with the one now is it's an orphan because nobody's servicing it anymore because it's gone belly up. And so they basically turned over someone else's software. No Ink is handling it, from what I understand, but it's not their software, so they don't want it. They don't want to deal with it or upgrade.
That is definitely what we're going through. There was something that happened, and it wasn't disclosed to the commissioners. When I was in Takiao, it was one of the administrators of the state. He said, "Oh, you down there where they was submitting all these bad records." And what happened was, we were sending, let's say that I registered to vote in 2006, but we transferred over to this new system in 2017. It changed my registration date to the date that they converted my record into the system.
Oh, no.
So it basically looked like I committed fraud and voted all these times before I registered. And nobody had any, I didn't find out. If I wouldn't have been there, I would have known. And that's how I found that out. I will say something about the remote for Jenny. Bev knows this, I ain't gonna go into it, but our tabulation room used to be where we could go in, the commissioners, there's a statute, and I won't read it all, but to sum it up, it basically says that all the keys should be at the responsibility of the commissioners. Any room, anywhere, everything, everywhere is at the responsibility of the commissioner. Now, you can delegate that responsibility, but it's like saying, I own the car, I can let you drive it, but I still own it. And I brought that up in a meeting, and basically it was being told to me that was not the case. And that's one thing that I've been seeking access to. And I had an inquiry where we were destroying thumb drives. They were trying to keep from breaking the chain they were taking the tabulator results, copying it to a thumb drive, putting it into a laptop that was connected to the internet, but never returning that same drive back. And immediately I was like, but you can't destroy it. There's evidence. Like you can't destroy it. I mean, they were taking pliers and destroying the thumb drives. So I really went berserk about that. And I was like, well, I don't even know where the thumb drives came, and you destroying them, that's a problem. I even said I would go to Target and just buy a bunch of new ones. We can take them out the plastic, and then I can feel more comfortable about those. Well, the subsequent election that I had this question, there's now privacy screens on the tabulator. And that is very problematic, because now how can I watch anything? So if somebody's remoted in, like I'm still remoted into the Norma's PC. I think this is the mantra for the day. Let me show y'all. Can I show them your PC, Norma? I am still remoted into Norma's PC, but you can't see it because this thing is acting like a privacy screen. So that is very problematic. It is dangerous on every level. That's Norma's computer. I've been typing to her to make sure that her computer stays up. I wanted to make sure that if her audio went down, I'm her tech guy. If her audio went down, that I could get her right back up. But that's so problematic to find out that it's software, it's remote software. Then I'm supposed to have access to a room that I don't have access. I'm being told by the person who's a subordinate to me that I don't have that access, despite state law declaring it in writing. And then they respond to my inquiry with opacity. We need transparency, right? You can't trust the process that's opaque. So I will be addressing that in the next meeting that I get a chance to. But I'm sure it's going to fall on deaf ears. But I'm still going to. I have the duty to promote free and fair elections. So I'll keep doing it. But it really helps to have this picture of some of the blanks filled in by these experts. And Jenny don't want to be called an expert if she is one. So sorry. Sorry, Jenny.
I don't like to be called an expert.
You're a subject matter expert.
There you go.
This is Sarah Freeman. I don't know if I can be heard or not.
Yes,
Yeah.
hi, Sarah.
There are 2 points on the issue of fiduciary responsibility. A lot of us were at the Shelby County Commission when Linda Phillips got up and said that if the Shelby County Commission did not fund what the Shelby County Election Commission said it wanted, that they could sue the Shelby County Commission. Essentially told them that she had a blank check and they would have to cover it. And I think that stunned everybody in the room. I mean, the chutzpah and that entitled attitude, the arrogance was just off the charts. The other thing is that she makes up her own rules. She defies state law. She locks out poll watchers from viewing the counting and the handling of the absentee ballots.
Would you tell that story, Sarah? Wasn't it you who told me that story earlier?
Yes.
Just tell that quickly to people, because that's quite a story, really.
November 2018, there were 4 of us who were duly appointed poll watchers by the state of Tennessee for a particular candidate. And that gives us the authority to watch the counting and the counting of ballots all the way through the certification process. And there was an election that was so close for the mayoral's election of Germantown, and 4 of us showed up at the Shelby County Election Commission and demanded to see the counting and the handling of the absentee ballots and the provisional ballots, and we were locked out, repeatedly locked out. We kept on showing up for 2 weeks straight, and it was very disconcerting because we had in our hands the clear authorization to be able to not only watch, but contest questionable absentee ballots. How do you contest a ballot that you are prevented from seeing? And so then to hear her use data based on some May 2018 study by her staff that then implicated Black voters in that was so insulting to watch that presentation. I think civil rights advocates across the globe should watch that Shelby County Commission presentation that she gave and come to their own conclusions in terms of the underlying.
Sarah, I just connected your name with the email. Just now. It just came online for me.
Right. Through the open records request, I have an incredible database, And through what Marlene Strube and I were able to get in and take pictures of, I've shared some of that with you, but I had no idea that you were being prevented from seeing these kinds of documents that I've been able to get to. That, to me, was stunning, that you have been prevented from seeing that. It is heartbreaking, because the underlying question is, why?
Yeah.
What is going on that there would be such a corrupt, and just blatantly, horribly, and it's a vigilant campaign to prevent the people from voicing their actual desires for governance. And it is an old machine here that we are up against with new tricks. And it is very disheartening, but it is to see how absolutely dedicated these particular people are to keeping control at all costs is also something that is extremely concerning. Why? What is the end game? What are they so afraid of?
If I could jump in there, I want you to know I added that. I took that film you're talking about. It's on the chat. It's 5 minutes long. I was outraged, okay? You know, I speak Greek language of elections. And what she put up was bull, complete bull. Even a stray mark she counted as an error, okay? It was outrage. But this is the behavior that I've seen in Pima County, Arizona, Maricopa County, what's happening in Philadelphia. Rich can tell you that. He's online. We've seen it in Broward County. We've seen it in, you know, all different parts. And it's usually communities of color that are heavily Democrat, because they see robbing your community is like, why does a bank robber rob a bank? Because that's where the money is. You guys are where the Democratic votes are, okay? And that is how this system works, and then we have to fight back. But I just want you to know, hey, we've licked it in Arizona. I think that we're going to go blue. We're going to go. We got a good election administrator in Maricopa who's asked me to sue him to get the ballot images released. You know, in my state, I want you to know you can sit in your living room and you can turn on your computer, plug it into your TV, and you can look at every election department and see the EMS working and see them counting, okay? You know, that's what happens when you're persistent, you know, and to keep after it. And that's the kind of energy that I want to share, that right now it's critical. We must stop them. We must educate those people on the boards to get them to understand. Because, you know, a lot of these things happen because of ignorance. I think Susan can tell a good story about this other county that had the ACLU and these other. Susan, you should tell. It's because people like us were not there. Dr. Spearman, who's on our last thing, president of the NAACP. I was working with him in Florida, and, you know, he said to the people he was speaking to, he says, you know, sometimes after I make a decision, because he serves on the Guilford, he says, people come to me and they say, Dr. Spearman, how can you make that decision? And you know what he says? Because you weren't here to get me informed. And you know, I can see Norma shaking her head, because that's the truth. And I'm sorry for being so late at the party.
That's right.
But I'm there. And we need to back up our people on these boards. We need to educate, and we can win. Thank you.
Thanks, John. I'd like to clarify, John's organization is nonpartisan. So going red or blue is not the point here. The point is that these machines do become a civil rights issue, because I think Norma mentioned that they can be allocated in such a way as to disenfranchise voters. If you put too few machines in a polling place, or you put machines that don't work in a polling place, you have robbed people of their votes.
Yeah, I'd like to hop on Jenny's street again. Jenny, can you tell us about this subject?
Well,
you're muted.
Benny, I was just going to reference a study. Do you mind if I
go ahead. Yeah, please. Jenny, you're muted anyway. You come in after.
Yeah, go ahead. You go first.
Okay, well, I just wanted to say that there are studies out there that show that touchscreens have been used for in that way, and that creates long lines. And long lines creates another form of voter disenfranchisement because people don't stay in lines. They leave, they have to go home and take care of their kids or get to work. And another study by Dr. Stephen Pettigrew, and we'll post, when we post the link to this video, we'll post some of the reports that people have mentioned so that you can, and the video of Linda Phillips talking to the county commission so that people can see those themselves. But just the last point I want to make is that this study on long lines showed that if people have to wait in a line to vote, there's a certain percentage of them that never vote again because the experience was so frustrating and that they just never vote again. So the thing with the hand-marked paper ballots, as everybody who's spoken about it has said, is that you can have a lot of people voting on hand-marked paper ballots at the same time. Now with the pandemic, it's another issue, but you can still space people. But you can have as many of those little voting booths as you want. But if you have to put a $5,000 machine in a polling place, you have to put a whole bunch of them in order for people to be able to vote without lines, and that never happens. There's almost always lines when you put these machines in polling places. So, okay, thanks. So Jenny, go ahead if you want to pick up on that.
Yeah, so I think that disproportionate distribution of these touchscreen voting machines first came on the radar in the 2004 presidential election in Ohio. And some of there have been articles written on it. Some of the information is just stunning. You know, was a woman who stood for 4 hours in line in her Democratic area, and then she went to where her mom votes, and it just her mom only took her 15 minutes. I think they had lines as long as 10 hours. In Franklin County, they decided to make do, this is in 2004, but they decided to make do with 2,866 machines, even though the analysis showed that the county needed 5,000 machines. And there's a related principle, which is the KISS principle, which I think applies here, keep it simple, stupid. By adding on this extra ballot marking device, as many jurisdictions have unfortunately done, and as we all are worried that Shelby County might do, you increase the complexity quite a bit, because that is literally just replacing a ballpoint pen with a touch screen that can break down. And as I mentioned, 20% of them broke down in this one South Carolina county that was studied by a journalist named Stephen Rosenfeld. There also was a 20% breakdown in Los Angeles County recently, just a few months ago, which debuted its universal use touchscreen ballot marking devices for the first time. And the result was lines of, up to 4 and 5 hours long. And I think people really sometimes underappreciate the impact of long lines until we're close to an election and they see what it looks like. In Ohio, they said that in Columbus, somewhere between 5,000 and 15,000 voters left because of the lines. And so it's a real factor, even if you're very skeptical about anyone actually flipping votes. The hallmark of voter suppression is long lines, and these touchscreen machines are absolutely facilitators of that.
Yeah, one reason, this is Chris Sauter, one reason why the touchscreens produce long lines is when they come in with their bids, they come in with fewer machines that are actually needed for those areas. So in order for them to win the contract initially, and then they hope that the county will buy more. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, but it inevitably produces long lines, and it's built into the bidding process.
Yeah, ES&S itself even admitted in a video or an article recently that touchscreens tend to cause longer lines. And the fact that according to I think it's the Pennsylvania State Department did a study of ES&S BMDs and found that they take 3 times as long as hand-marked paper ballots and scanners. And that's insane. Why would you ever buy a system that's going to take you 3 times as long as the simpler system?
Can you please send me that? Because I've been hearing the opposite.
Sure, it's in the Frank Bajac's article for the Associated Press.
From AP, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that was a really
John Brakey had a conversation with an ES&S representative in North Carolina, or maybe it was I think it was Stephen Rosenfeld, had a conversation with the ES&S representative in North Carolina, and he just he said the reason why we push, in addition to the money they make, they push the touch screen so hard is they want to remove any possibility of audits and recounts. They don't want these. They don't want any kind of accountability.
That's right. And so when people say that there hasn't been fraud with these touch screens, I mean, you can't see the inside of them. That's the problem. It makes it very difficult to discover, which is why what Benny found when he actually went and looked at these poll tapes and compared them to the reported totals, it was just so stunning. And so, I mean, for people to, if they want to see what these poll tapes look, oops, it's not on my screen. Well, they're like these long flowing strips of paper, and they're posted outside of the precincts, like long, extra long receipts. Sort of a pain in the, oh, here they are, right there. So, I mean, he went and he actually compared them from several of the places that he knew were primarily African-American voters. I think there were some Black churches, and the votes weren't making it out on the other end from the precincts to the county tabulators.
Can you post that, Jenny? It's not showing up on the screen.
Oh, it's not showing? You can't see it here?
No, you have your bottleneck graphic up.
Oopsie. Hang on one sec. That's weird. Because on mine, it does not have the bottleneck. It has well, that's all right. They're just long, you don't need to really see it. You can take my word for it. They're just these long, sort of cash register, like many of them.
We need paper proof.
Can I ask a question? Hello?
Sure, go ahead, Joseph, go ahead.
Yeah, supposedly, there's 3 vendors who bid, excuse me, and they each submitted a BMD and an HMPB bid. And the RFP was just for a BMD, but one of the vendors asked the question, can they also bid alternative systems? And they were told they could. And I assume that's how they got to each submit 2 bids. Is there something we should look for that a vendor, be it Dominion or ES&S or Hart, would do with the HPMB bid to make it look less attractive when they're also trying to sell BMD?
Well, this is Susan. It's not exactly answering your question, Joe, but I will just say one other thing about ES&S that makes their hand paper ballot system less desirable, which is their ballots that the BMDs produce are a different size than the ballots used by the rest of the voters. And there have been discrimination lawsuits in Maryland, or there's a discrimination lawsuit,
right,
because the disabled voters said that they were having to use a different size ballot, whereas Hart InterCivic has their paper ballot system. When they have the ballot marking devices in each precinct for voters with disabilities, their ballots are the same size and look like everybody else's voters when they're counted. So that didn't really answer your question, but I apologize, actually. Do you want to just repeat that again? Because I think that was I got a little off topic there. You were asking about, oh.
Well, I'll just say, if the vendor is putting in 2 bids, one for hand-marked paper ballot, one for BMD, and there's more profit in the BMD side, is there something they can do with the hand-marked paper ballot to sort of sabotage that bid so that the BMD bid looks better?
I can answer that one, Susan. We have John Brakey, we have me, we have Garland Favorito. There are so many bids that we have seen. That's what makes this so murky. We see what the actual price is. We see what they recommend for other counties. They have to be able to provide this service, and that's a service. They have to be able to provide the equipment. If I could just grab Lynn Bernstein, I think they had one point where they presented something, and when North Carolina chose it, they was like, well, we can't provide it or something. What happened, Lynn, down there for you?
So we certified a system that used, I believe it was Windows